Steps 2. Also, all of this I have in like I have in my Professor Figma TikTok. I made this kind of like a walkthrough, but I'm gonna go a little bit deeper, and this part that's gonna be recorded is gonna be a little bit more deep. Um, but like I've actually used this to create like freaking spider walk cycles, right? Like there's so much that you can do this. Um, Cool. So when I click, it's going to go from this frame to this frame, right? And basically what I did was I hacked that these frame sets kind of are animating from this one to this one. And you actually can see now that there's this like correlation, it shows how this frame is animating to this one, right? And this is animating to this one. When I highlight it, you see that the frame is recognizing it, and that means that the smart animate's going to work. So here, I'm going to click, it's going to go here. Let's just check this interaction by clicking on that noodle. So on click, navigate to step 2. I'm going to have the animation be smart animate. And here I'm going to choose a custom ease. I like my eases to be ease in, ease out, right? So I'm going to do this, and oftentimes I'll just kind of copy it. So usually a little S, right? It's an ease in, ease out. And if anybody wants more, I actually have I have like a whole lecture deck on how to like manage your eases. So step 2, boom, 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 smart animate. Let's have this go a little bit longer so you can see it. So I'm gonna say about 500 milliseconds. That's a half a second. So let's do, I like nice solid numbers. So 0.8, 0.2. There we go. So that's about 80%. That's 20% right there. That's where that little dot's going. Cool. So all I'm going to do is I'm just going to have this go back for now. So same thing. It retains all of that. So smart animate. Cool. So all that's good to go. Let's hit play on this flow. So I could walk y'all through that. So this is going to play, and basically it's just going to show you. It's going to animate one to back, one to back, one to back. Right? So I was able to animate using a main component nested kind of like its instances in another one, right? I didn't have to move all of those independently of each other, which is like really sweet. But what else is cool is this also provides the opportunity for a secondary animation. So what I could do here is I could select this, right? I can rotate it as well, right? I can rotate on its side. I can make this bigger. So now not only is that moving left to right, but the whole thing is going to be scaled and rotated, right? So if I hit play, we've further made this like animation more complex by kind of like controlling it. Let me, it's probably going slow. There we go. Boop, boop. Let me hit Z. There you go, Phil. That'll probably make it better. I think it's because I'm running like video in my background, so it's like going a little bit slow, but there you go. So you got that like cool kind of like effect. And like, you know, you can further control this, right? So like I can go here and I could change other properties. So I can go to my selection colors, right? I can make that green. Oops. Let's see. Boop, 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 boop. Let's make sure I have the right thing. There we go. Why can't I select it green? I'm probably doing something wrong. This happens sometimes when I don't prep ahead of time. Let's see, two. Either that or there's a bug. Sometimes it's a bug.
You might need to
Oh, I
reference
know
the
why. I think I
cards.
know why. Here we go. Say that again.
No, nothing.
Oh, no, I think I know why it is. Let me just target that. And I think I like just, I can make the override change here. There we go. All right, so then, yeah. Boop, boop, boop. There you go, now I can change it. All right, cool. So now I can have this like effect here, and it'll also transition those values. So why do I need to combine the components as variants? If I don't combine the components as variants, there's no way for me to control the, I would have to move all of these pieces in individually. And I could show you that one more time. I'll just walk you through the whole step, like one more go. So here, let me just hit play on this. Play. Make my window a little bit smaller. It'll play smoother. So what happens when you run like a 5K screen. Z, there you go. So there you go. So boom, boom, boom. And I could even, let's say if I want to adjust this a little bit more. Oops. I'm gonna press Z. There we go. So boom. So now it's like rotating a lot more and applying that. So it's like secondary, third, tertiary, and etc. So I'll walk you all through that one more time. So here, I'm going to leave this here. I'm going to create another page and I'll just kind of explain the concept. So basically, the reason that I needed the variance, right, was because if I create this object, right, so if I create a triangle again, so let's show you triangle, boom, Command E, right, and I make that a component and I'm going to rotate, right, and copy paste, bring that there, copy paste, bring that there. So the whole point is that this main component that I have here, right, when I command click on it, oops, right, when I command click on it and like I move it, right, it's like moving from within that component. So all of these other triangles here, these are all instances of that main one, right? So this is my main triangle. And so that's the main triangle. So now what I'm going to do is I'm basically going to take that and I make that into another component. Now, when I create this component, you can't have a main component inside of another main component, right? So it needs to be on the outside. And Figma is going to automatically do this the second that I create it. So if I go to create this, it takes the main component that I had inside of there and pushes it to the outside. So now when I move this object that's in here, right, it's basically controlling all of those other pieces. And because I'm using instances of this to control this one, right, that's how I'm able to kind of make something where basically this acts as a controller and this acts as the receiver. Now, if I was to try to make an animation, oh, I just hold down the shift key when I rotate it. Like, I like geometry. So, what it is this is a uh um I can't even remember it because for me it's like 9 p.m. So like words just don't make no sense. But um, it's just a not equilateral triangle. Yeah, like all of those are even, and that's what allows you to easily make that hexagon, right? And like I know that because I just sit there playing around with like tangrams as like a child. So like I like making this stuff. So right, so this is the main hexagon. It's a hex 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, that's hexagon. Hexagon, right? So this one's on the inside. Now, the reason that I need the variant sets, like if I was to take an instance of it, put it here, right, and have like another frame, the second that I make adjustments to this one, it applies it to both, right? There's no way for me to control with the main object, right? So like, let's say if I wanted to be like really crafty with this and have like a whole bunch of these, right? And like I said, I like messing around with like some really cool like abstract shit, right? So like playing around with how these kind of like take place, if yeah, you could detach it, but then if you detach them, right, you're stuck. You can't experiment further, right? So like I could detach this in frame one, but then you got detached instances, and like if you want to make like more changes, um, you can't. Like you're still gonna be kind of like stuck. So this actually used to be my old way of doing it. It was like, okay, I set it all up and then I go and I detach, but then like I'd have to go and set it all up again. So what's really cool about the introduction of variants is that I can make this a whole component set. And then like if I were to copy and paste this in here, right? So now this set is associated with this instance, right? So this is my set. This is a component set is associated with this instance. And now I can basically duplicate this and make the changes that I want, and it's kept. And then I could duplicate this and I can make, changes, here. And it has that complete memory and this will allow me to like iterate and like push that concept like further, and I can animate between these. Was that a question? No. So this is like one of those things that I do. And like I said, like I use this for like walk cycles and stuff. Let's see if I can find like one of my walk cycles. I wasn't prepared to have that queued up, but let me see if I can find it. I have like 7 different Figma accounts, so bum, 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 bum. Hopefully I named it right. I'm also terrible at naming. Walk cycle. Maybe I called it spider. It was a spider. Nope, slider, slider, slider. Ah, I'm not gonna be able to find it. I have to here, I think I have it on my Instagram. I'll just show you like a video of it. But basically, I was able to create like an armature the same way that you would like make like inverse kinematic like arms. Here we go. Oops, you have a tab. There we go. So I using that same concept, right? So I have like boom, 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 boom. I created a walk cycle for a spider. So like using those component sets, I use each component set as an individual pose, and then like I animate between those poses. Um, any reason I'm not using the Figma desktop app? Yes, because I use the Figma desktop app for work. So all of like the privileged Figma stuff is on that one, and I use the browser for when I'm doing demos. So let's go back. I'll show you how to like I made oops, I made a little spider as well. Another version of that spider. Let me show you that. Here you go. I'll just show you like a little video because don't know where I have it queued up. But yeah, so like I made this little spider, and basically it's like I'm using those component sets in a way to kind of like have these kind of parented, nested relationships with those objects, and allows me to make like these like really, really cool animations. So I highly encourage you, like this method you could actually take pretty far. So what I'm gonna do, same thing here. I'm going to select both of those. I'm going to add a stroke. I want the stroke to be in the center. Let's make this white. Let's make that a little bit bigger. Actually going to delete that second set so I can recreate it. I'll show you how I do the mask again. So I'm going to draw a circle. I always make my mask green. So just kind of like for my sanity. Here we go. Put that in the center. I'm going to move this all the way down. Oops. Where'd it go? I'm gonna move it all the way down. Back button. So I just hit the left bracket. Left bracket is like the easiest way to move something all the way to the back. So I'm gonna right click, use that as mask. Let's make sure that that's aligned. There we go. So I have it here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a quick slider animation. I'm going to show y'all how to make like, like really bomb slider animation that it's kind of, like a different way of thinking about things. So here we go. I have that first frame. I'm going to duplicate that. And then here in my second frame, I'm going to move that over to the left. Now, what I'm doing, once again, is like if I were just to select the component, right, it doesn't move to the left. If I hit Command key, right, it selects the inside object, and then I can just either with like my left and right arrows move that left and right. I'm holding down the Shift key as I do it. My nudge right now I think is like set to like 20. Don't ask me why it's set to 20, but to set your nudge, Command / and type in nudge, right? Your nudge amount. So what's your small nudge? What's your big nudge? My big nudge is normally like 8. But sometimes when I'm working on slides, I have it like 20 or 24. So I'm gonna make it 24, and that way I can move it at 24 pixels. So let's say I open the aperture up, right? And I wanna create an animation, easily do so. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna create a dragging prototype. For those of you that are unaware of how dragging prototype works, you'll get to learn. So what I'm going to make is a very simple slider, and then I'm going to make a complex one. So I'm going to start with like a little, let's have a little dot there. I'm going to hit a rectangle key. I'm going to pull out that radius all the way. There we go. Let's center that. I'm going to set that all the way to the back. I'm going to bring this all the way to the front. Let's make that white. Let's line that up. I'm just gonna eyeball it. There you go. Oh, that's 20. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There you go. So now I got this circle and I'm gonna have it slide to the left, right? And I'm gonna use Smart Animate to get this thing to work properly. Let's make sure that this is in the right space. I'm actually going to show y'all something pretty cool. So I'm going to basically take this. I'm going to put it exactly where I want it. I'm going to copy it. I'm going to paste it into this frame. But let's say I actually want this instance here. I can Command C copy, and then I can come over here. When I right click, I can choose paste to replace. It'll just replace it. So it'll replace that object right outright. So I usually use that to like help me position things, you know, here and there. So I know that that instance is like specifically replacing that here. So let's actually move that over here to the left. And the way that dragging interactions work is the object that is causing the interaction, right? So if I go to prototype here, right, this is the object that's going to have the drag interaction. I'm going to drag this little, you know, the noodle down here, right? So I'm dragging it right there. And instead of on click, I'm going to choose on drag. And in order for drag to work, the object that this is like associated with, and it's actually difficult here, but this is highlighted. When this is selected, you'll see the object that it's relating to in a separate frame. It'll be highlighted as well. That means that like the layers need to match up, the naming needs to match up. Granted, I didn't name them very well, right? This is called ellipse 2 and this is called ellipse 2, but I know that they're named properly and they're arranged accordingly. So you just got to make sure that you do that correctly. And actually, if I look, no, they aren't named accordingly. I'm going to be better. I'm going to hit the left bracket, left bracket, left bracket. Same thing here, left bracket, left bracket, left bracket. I'm just pushing everything to the back. So there's rectangle 1, ellipse 2, rectangle 1, ellipse 2. Should give them better names than I do. Don't be like me in that respect, but you know, like I know it's going to work. So I'm going to on drag. It just needs a direction to go to. So here it's going over here to the right. Let's change that color so you can see that property change reflected. And then here, I'm going to select that same object. I'm going to go to prototype and have it there. Same thing, on drag, navigate to frame 1. Let's make sure this is frame 2. All right, so the on drag is going to go back. Got my smart animate, got my 500 milliseconds. Everything's good as gravy. So we got that going. If I hit play on flow 1, so now you'll see as I drag it, right, it's performing that slide animation. The reason that the drag works is because the object that has like the same name is going in that new direction, right? Like if I actually had that going up, in order for this prototype to work, oops, let me hit play. In order for this prototype to work, right, I would need to drag up. See, so it's basically the destination is defined by where that same object eventually ends up in the corresponding frame. Likewise, you can create like a third interaction by just having it go in a different direction. So if I was actually to snap that to the middle, right, have this one go to the right, I can go ahead and choose an alternate path, right? I can create a whole nother reality where this object is all the way to the right. I can give it a different color. Give it a different color and give that a different property. There we go, right? So now I can drag back. So if I go here in my prototype, let's check out my noodles. That's literally what we call them. We call them noodles. What I can do is I can select that object and see here, we already have a drag. I can create another one. So I can just go on drag, right? We're going to go to that other frame 2, which once again, I should probably name. Let's name real things. Okay, this is left, right? This is right, and this is center, right? So now when I drag it that way, let's check out the prototype, click on the object. So here we got that second drag, right? I don't want to have to worry about creating another one. I already started it. I can say navigate to, and we go left. And then we have smart animate. Let's do our custom ease of 0.8, 0.2. Oops, not that one. It's 0.8, 0.21. Because I remember my numbers. So it's like 0.8, 0.2. So 80%, 20%. That's where that handle is located. So on drag, we're going to navigate left. And I think we had like 500 milliseconds. So it's just the amount of fidelity in that. So when I drag this right, it'll go here. When I drag this left, it'll go here. So let's hit that play. Bump, 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 bump. So if I go left, there we go. And if I go right, it'll go that way. So you can have multiple kind of like instances on that one object and how it behaves. Oh yeah, if you don't drag it like all the way, like it'll like snap, right? To like where it should go. So it's kind of cool in how it handles that. And yeah, I can even say like, oh, okay, like this one went left, and then I can make this one, go right. Right? So now it'll make a little bit more sense. So I can actually create center. So I hit play. And here we go. So right and left. Right and left. All right, but and I can cover this if you want. Does anybody know how I did this? How do I have this object on an arc? Does anybody know? I mean, technically anybody could duplicate the file, look at the file and tell me. Multiple points in the arc? Nope. It's only two parts. Group? Nope. Here, I'll show you. I'll actually just duplicate the file and show you the file itself. And I'll walk you through this. So here we go. Bum, 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 bum. So oftentimes to kind of create these like interactions that don't necessarily follow like in Figma, there's no way to easily create that arc. So what I'm doing here is I have this invisible dragger, right? So this is like a hit area. So basically anything in this space is being dragged just from left to right. So all I'm doing is I'm dragging this invisible dragger, right? So here it is on the left, and then here it is on the right. So it's basically just an invisible box, right? And I'm dragging the invisible box left and right. And then I have an object that's a rotator. So what I'm doing is I'm just rotating the circle. So basically it has a center point here, but the object isn't even in that frame, right? The object is on the outside, right? So it's not rotating at its center point. It has a different center point. So in order to achieve this arc, right, I'm grabbing an invisible rectangle and dragging that invisible rectangle left and right. And I have this circle here that is on a movie clip that's acting as like a rotator. And what's cool is that like this is the same way like you would do something in like After Effects, right? Like or like Cinema 4D, you would have like this null object that would kind of like be a controller of the other object, and you're just applying that principle, here. So in practice, what I could do, and I'll create a new page. How do you come up with those ideas to use tools like this, I guess, from the way other tools are used? The way that I come up with these ideas, so I used to be a professor at RIT, and like my students would just ask me to do like all kinds of crazy shit. And I would be like, okay, I will tell you tomorrow. And I'd go home and I just try something out and like, hey, did this work? Yeah. The cool thing about being a professor is that, like in any given semester, I'd have like up to 80 students asking me all kinds of things, and I just have to figure it all out. Or like I'd see 80 students like, kind of mess up things left and right. And like I would learn from their collective, issues, which is why it's kind of like a great thing to be in school. because you have so many people to kind of like learn from collectively, and that's one of the reasons why I love Figma, is that you could so easily share some of these ideas and be in this collaborative space. Um, so yeah, so like I'm actually joining Figma from RIT. At RIT, I was a professor. I've actually been teaching interaction design since about 2005. So I first started teaching, yeah. So like I've been teaching for a long time. So yeah, so a lot of it is just me messing around with things. Another way that I got my ideas is that I used to be a Flash developer, so I used to make games in Flash. So like if you grew up playing like SpongeBob SquarePants like Flash games on nick.com, I probably worked on it at some point. So cool. That's that. So any questions on some of this concept? I'd be happy to move on to a couple other things. Or does anybody have any other kind of like questions in general about things? I could show you interactive components and how they work as well. All right, so here, I'm going to show you some stuff with interactive components. So right now, what we've been doing is kind of using and hacking component sets as a way to manage like a state for a set of objects, right? Like we want this thing to be like collectively animated, kind of like using like a simple main point. It's kind of by design that way, but it's like, unless you really dig in, you're not necessarily using Figma in this way. But like I love to. So here, let's show y'all some other kind of like cool things. Interactive components, really quickly, in a nutshell. By the way, anything as a viewer, you can like duplicate anything that's in here in this file. Like if you go right here, when I'm done, you can hit duplicate and you'll have a copy of my entire file like in your drafts. So like I highly encourage you like, steal this file and fuck around with it. Sorry, F around with it. It's late for me. Like I said, it's like 8:54, so I apologize for the profanities. Um, Man, we're coming up on time. How much time can I go over? I don't
However
realize
long
I,
you
I
need.
oh, okay.
There's no like big time. Yeah, and if anyone needs to go, like definitely
All
feel
right.
free.
People mention stuff about auto layout. So I want to show y'all something um, really cool with auto layout. I'm going to show you some responsive kind of like hacks that I like to work with. So really quick, I'm going to draw out a frame, right? And I'm going to just give this a full color. I'm going to talk about constraints and I'm going to talk about auto layout and I'm going to talk about responsiveness. I'm probably going to go till about like for my time 9:15, so 15 past the hour. So here we go. Let's make that like 800 by 800. All right. So I'm going to create a text field and I'm going to grab some like text from, I just typed in Notion. Will I go to Notion's page? No. Oh, I can't go there. NPR. I almost pulled up like Figma Notion. You almost saw like, actually, I don't know if you can see this window. I'm opening it up a different thing. I'm just going to grab some text, some placeholder text. Here we go. All right. So when you're working with text boxes, you got to make sure you know what kind of text box that you're working with, right? So I selected this text box, right? There's kind of like flexible width, right? That just expands on. There is fixed width and height. So you see here, this is like a fixed height, but it's expanding beyond. What I really want is I want to work with auto height, right? So as I expand this, right, I control the width, but then the height kind of fills to the text, and you see the text box goes with it. Always be aware of like the type of text box you're using, and chances are you want it to be this auto height, not auto width, and not fixed size. So here I'm going to make this text a little bit smaller. Let's make this, and this is going to be a little bit more practical that you can use in your everyday, I promise. So let's go down, let's go about 32 text. My line height, let's say I'm going to go like 40. There we go. Okay, cool. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to select this object. I'm going to press Shift A. That's going to make an auto layout frame. We know it's an auto layout frame by the icon over here on the left. I'm going to give it a fill of white. I'm going to round out those corners. And right now, this object, if I look over here, you'll see that it's set to hug contents, right? And its height is set to hug contents. So what it's doing, it's relying on this text box to define its width and height, right? So like as I add text, right, it's going to fill and grow that text box. But the one thing that you're going to notice here is that, oops, didn't mean to do that. The one thing you're going to notice here is that as you fill it, it's filling from the top, right? So what I'm going to do, I'm going to create this as a component, and I'm just going to call this like, text area. So I'm going to take an instance of this and put it here, right? So when I begin typing, right, it's filling down, right? You see how this is filling down? Let's say instead, right, like I'm making a reusable asset, right? I want this to be reused, but I want this to be like vertically, like kind of like centered. So when I type out my text grows out from the center. So there's a number of ways that you can do this. The primary way is going to be, right, I'm going to select this. And this is often overlooked, right? Constraints and resizing. The constraints dictate how this object will kind of behave when this frame is resized. If we look right here, we'll see that it's set to top and left, right? And it's actually hidden under here, right? You see left and you see top. So I'm going to change that to be center, right? So I'm going to change that to be center, and I'm going to change that to be center. So now, and you can even see this reflected when I select this object, you'll see these blue lines come across in the middle, right? Those blue lines come across in the middle. That's basically telling you how it's going to be constrained. So when I begin to add in more text, right, it's growing from the bottom or from the center, right? So like as I remove text, right, it's centering down to the middle. So this object is now kind of like responsive from the middle. I can take that same object, a duplicate of it, move it to the top, and I can have it now behave differently. Let's say from the top, I want it to come down. So I can select up here. I can, instead of like, hug contents, or not hug contents, instead of being center aligned from vertically, I could say come from the top. So if I click down here, you'll see, that's right, top. So now as I add in text, right, it's coming in from the top. Likewise, I could take that same object, bring it down here, and with this one selected, I can say bottom. So now when I double click, I press return, and it grows from the bottom. So this is really cool because if I were to take this object and resize it, right? This object is center constrained. This object is top constrained. This object is bottom constrained. So like now when I like scale this, right? This is going to stick to the middle. This is going to stick to the top. This is going to stick to the bottom, right? Conversely, right? If I'm expanding this out, right? They're just all kind of sticking to the middle, because right now it's basically hugging the contents of that. So what I can do is I can set this object up, and for like left and right, it's going to be blacked out. Like I can't actually choose left and right. So what I can do is I can say like left and right is fixed, right? So now this is like fixed. And I can select the text that's inside to be reliant on it. So instead of the text inside the auto layout object being fixed with, I can set it to fill container. So now the main object is fixed, right? So it's still standing still, but I can change that now to left and right. So when this is left and right, I know this seems a little bit confusing, I apologize. This will like stick to those edges. Right? So the one thing I want you to realize here is that I'm using the same component, right? This component is basically populating all of these, right? I can go here and I can change, the color, I could change its properties, but the properties of them inside of this frame, they're responding to that frame, right? So like here, because this object is now left and right and fixed, right? It's no longer reliant on the contents to dictate its width. And this is kind of like where people get stuck with a lot of auto layout stuff is they're not actually thinking through, like you're actually dictating how you want these things to behave. So like if this wasn't set to fill container, if this was just set to fixed width, then it's just going to be its original width. But I want it to fill that container, and it can only fill that container if the container itself has a width for it to kind of constrain itself to. And those constraints kind of give you a lot of like really cool properties to adjust. What makes this really cool is if I draw out a frame and I create a layout grid, right? So like, let's say I want this grid to have, let's say 4 columns, right? I'm going to throw in like a generous margin too. Let's say 32 pixel margin. So if I was to take this same component, I'm going to option drag it in here. Let's give that background a little bit different color. Oof, that's a little bit too harsh on the eyes. Let's give it a little bit of a background color. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to stick it right on those edges. And because it has left and right constraints, now when I scale this width, it's going to follow those grid container points. So likewise, I can select this to be like, all right, these two, and I can select this to be those 4, and those left and right constraints are going to honor and follow that grid, right? Which is going to be really cool because they're going to push left and right. Likewise, there we go. So that makes it kind of fun. So if I wanted to, I could basically take this whole object. Let's say I want to add in, like a rectangle to serve as a like a photo. I could just paste it in there. Right now, this object is set to like go left, so I'll just make it go down, and I can actually just press up to have that in there. I could select this photo to say fill container. It's now going to fill the container, and I'm going to set the height to fixed height. So you can see that these kind of represent, they're doing their thing. However, this container right here, I just want to make sure that the height isn't fixed, that the height is actually set to hug contents as well. And you'll see anytime you make a change, right? Like Figma is trying to do the best thing it can to understand what you were trying to do. So you'll actually see those kind of changes sort of represented there. So here you'll see that this frame, even though I've made updates to that main component, they're still like kind of reflected here. What does this one got going on? I think it just has some extra text. Does it got some extra text? Does it got some extra padding? Who knows? Let's see. It's got something in it. I'm gonna need to just reset all overrides. There we go. Okay, cool. So that's set to the original. So any questions with this? Is this helpful? Y'all learning something? Because those constraints, I feel like, is something that is so overlooked by individuals. And you can see here, right? Like, oh, okay, like, yo, Mig, like what you do over there. It's something cool. You just come over here, reset those overrides, and you get back at it. Reset all overrides. So the last thing that I wanted to show is how to make this like really useful in let's say like the instance of like designing like a responsive website or like an app, right? So what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to delete all these, right? And I'm going to have this frame. I'm going to have like this one be a little bit wider. I'm going to give that more columns. Let's give this one 8 columns. And then I'm going to have another one that's even wider that has 12 columns. So this will be like a 12 column layout, right? So I'm going to have a phone. Let's have tablet, and let's have desktop, right? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the component that I created and I'm going to drop it in here, right? And like, let's say, at this size, bam, like they're 2 across. And why is that not working? Well, that's not working because we're going to set that instead to fill container, and now it's filling to the container. So I got this one, I got this one. Let's say we got 4 going, right? So boom. So we got those 4 in here, right? I'm going to select them all. And we're going to set those constraints. So like, let's set left and right constraints. So when that's set, right, they're all going to follow that grid. So now let's take those same components and let's take it to the tablet where it's probably going to be a little bit different, right? Let's say here in the tablet, they're going to extend out. So I got 1, 2, 3, and 4. Oops. 3 and 4. I know this is probably a miserable grid, but they should all be set, right? And they're growing with that grid as well. Might be helpful too for this to have more generous gutter. Add more gutter there. I'll get through the concept. All right, boop, 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 boop. All right, so let's move those down. And then let's say in like desktop, they're just like, you got tons of these, they're like too wide. That might be like a little bit off. There you go. Seems about right. And let's test that out, that desktop width. There we go. So they're left and right and they're like fitting, but you can see that there's like different ones. Now I'm going to show y'all my favorite plugin. It's called Responsive. Let me find out. I don't have it installed on here. Let's find it. Responsive plugin Figma. Responsive. Here we go. There's actually a couple of these. This one's my favorite because it's like really simple. It's by Imen Sanani. I'll share a link with it. Here we go. Boom. And I'm going to install this. Hopefully it's installed in the right one. Do I have the right account? Switch account. Education of Figma. Yes. Okay, cool. Hopefully it's installed here. All right. So now I'm going to go responsive. There it is, responsive. And what's so cool about this plugin, so it's running it, I'm going to have my responsive frame. So I'm going to choose my input frames. So 1, 2, 3, I'm holding on the shift key and I have my input frames. So phone, tablet, desktop. And you see it's like identifying the widths right here. Then I'm going to choose my responsive frame, right? And so now I'm going to hide the grid. So now as I scale my frame, goes boom. How cool is that? So this frame is now showing you all of those different layouts at those given breakpoints and showing you how they behave. I mean, you could design it much better than this. I know this is just like a little example, but anything? No? This you need to have the plugin run. Otherwise, it's not going to be refreshing it. So like basically it's got like an event handler and it's like checking as you resize the responsive frame and it won't run properly. But what's really cool is you can go through and you could change like, so here I'm going to change the properties, right? Let's make the text a little bit bigger, right? I'm going to grab all these. Let's say they're all like red. Let's say if you want you have a variant of this. So like, let's go ahead, let's create a variant and the variant has like a much larger image. One thing I like to do with my variants too, I'll actually set them as auto layout. So it'll just fill there. So there we go. I got a variant of this. Let me change that variant to tall. So then like here, I could just be like, oh, okay, all of y'all, let's say all of y'all are going to be the tall one, right? And then I could just move them up here. So now when I just make this larger and it goes to the tall frame, boom, it's updated and I have the tall one. So like I can see those changes kind of like reflected and I get a much better sense of how this behaves as I delve in between these frames, and I could choose whether or not I want to create another like interstitial frame. So it helps me get a really good sense of how my layout might be performing and like how I might want to change things up. So I can go to my desktop and I can be like, oh, well, I want to, change this for whatever reason. I could just make that change here. I could change that color to like, let's say blue, right? And then, when I make that responsive change, you'll see it like updated and reflected here. So this is really cool. Like when you want to like manage those and you kind of like want to tweak and see how that works. So it's like one of my favorite things to do. Likewise, whenever I'm making, like assets for like social media or something, I really like to use, something like this. Like, I'll make that like kind of like reusable component, um, and like play around with those constraints. So then that way, this is going to, like exist, there in that center, like as I move it. I can have, another object on the bottom left, right? Or like, let's even say the bottom right. Like right now, if I move this, this is scaling to the center, but I could go ahead and I could change its constraints and say, oh, okay, no, you're the bottom right. And then I can move this up here and be like, oh, you're going to be top left. And then, you're down here and you can be like, oh, you are, left and bottom. So now when I go to resize this, right, they're following suit, right? So this one is center center, this is top left, this is bottom right, this is bottom left, and those are constrained. And because this is on the bottom, as I add more text, right, it grows from the bottom. And because this is in the center, as I add more text, it expands from the center. So it saves you so much freaking work. It's a little thing, but it's one of those things that like a lot of people overlook. A lot of professional designers don't think about setting constraints properly. And a lot of times people, when they're like working with auto layout, they often forget that, those constraints are just immediately under, or that they can correspond to this little window over here on the left. It's also a great way to like manage that if you're like, performing like an animation between two frames. This way you're not constantly having to manage its orientation or its space. It's just kind of coming from the center. Cool. So any questions?
There's one in the chat. Any reason why we cannot add layout grids for an auto layout frame?
You can add a grid before the frame. It's that like an auto layout frame itself, right? Think of the auto layout being placed onto an object, onto a frame that would have the grid, right? So like you would have your grid here, right? And then you would add it. There's a little trick where like before, like if you have a frame that has a grid and you make this auto layout. Oh yeah, it gets rid of it now. Hold on. There was a little trick. I think that got changed with a recent version of auto layout. Um, but it's just it's different than like what it's intended for. So like if you want to think of your auto layout object or your auto layout component as being on a frame, right? So like I have a generic doubt Miggi. Oh, that's the same thing. So what you would want to do is you're going to take the thing that has auto layout and you're probably going to put it onto a frame that would then contain the grid. Does that make sense? So I use both. Um, so like let's say like I would have a layout grid on something like let's say if I was to be designing like a phone layout, right? And I'll actually show you something that like I'll do. So I'm gonna select this frame. I'm gonna go like iPhone 13 Pro. So what I would be doing is placing objects onto this frame. So when I'm working here, I'm actually going to create two layout grids. So I'm going to create an underlying baseline grid, right, for my rows, right? So I'll create rows, I'll set them to auto, I'll set them to top, I set my height to 8, and then I'll set either the gutter to 8 or to 0, and then it gives me these lines. I'm going to increase the darkness so you can kind of see that there. So this would be like my baseline grid, and I would add like my columns on top of that, right? So if I have like these columns, I would usually set them to 4. I would give like a definitive margin, such as like 24, 32. I would set my gutter value, and then they would be set to stretch. And stretch allows them to like kind of grow from the middle. So typically, if I'm doing mobile, I might do that. There's other reasons why I might adjust that, just because like iPhone is a little bit different and usually how its width is calculated, so I might make a change there. But what I would do is I would actually work this as the base, and then I would bring auto layout objects into this frame. So if I was to have like, let's say, text field, I need some text. Let's say if I was to have a text field, let's say that text is like 12 point, 16 point. The way that I use the baseline grid is that your line height, in order to get the text to be on every single line, the line height has to be divisible by your baseline grid value. So right now my baseline grid value is a value of 8. So every 8 lines. So if I change my line height to be a value divisible by 8, I can get them always to like line up. So I'm going to change this to, so if it's 16, I could be either 20 or 24. So now when I set one line, they'll all be on that line. Should be 24, not 20, sorry. Usually, I mean, baseline grid could either be like 4 or 8. So you'll see here that my line height is 24, so it's divisible by 8. So you'll see every single line will match up. So typically, what I might do here is like, let's say if I'm like building something out, make sure I set this auto height. Like if I have like objects that I'm going to auto layout. So 1, 2, 3, right? Let me get another bit of text, right? The auto layout frame, Shift A, the auto layout frame is going to be inside of that like container frame. So the container frame is going to have the grid. My auto layout is going to be an object inside of that container frame that I will then align to the grid. Now with auto layout, right, like here I'm adjusting the spacing of 16, right? And you'll notice this is actually one of my biggest pet peeves is that, okay, this value is all values of 8, but then this is no longer on my baseline grid, right? Even if the height is divisible by 8, like, well, why might that be? Let me make sure this is, I'll just set to 80. I'm gonna set this to 80 just so y'all know that it's definitely divisible by 8 and it might not be working. And that's because the height of this text doesn't necessarily match that value. So what I do to kind of like offset this is I'll actually put that text into another auto layout grid, or another auto layout frame. And I just add a little bit of padding at the bottom. And the way that this works, right? So I just add a value of like 2 padding, and then now everything else is gonna snap up. Then this text might be just off by like a pixel. So same thing, right? Shift A, I'm gonna remove that, and I'm just gonna adjust the padding as necessary, right? And it's basically just gonna be offsetting that initial value. So what I'm doing is I'm adjusting that baseline, and then that allows like all of my text to maintain that same vertical rhythm. So I got the spacing of 3, I got a spacing of 2, a spacing of 3, right? And like if this is over your head, like I apologize. These are things that like I spend way too much time thinking about. But like now I could snap it, right? I could snap it. And then like all of that vertical rhythm is now maintained. And basically what I get here is just like a little bit of a padding. So this then becomes an auto layout object inside of an auto layout object, just so I can add that padding. But what's cool is that in here, you'll actually see that padding reflected. Like if I was to select that text box, it tells me the padding that has then been added to that auto layout frame. So I can see that additional padding here on the bottom. And this will correlate to the same way that the text might be represented like when working with CSS. So if you want it to have that like level of perfection when applying, the vertical rhythm, it allows you to do so. So the short answer is you use both. Auto layout objects inside of a frame that will contain the grid that you're using. Does that make sense? And then basically I would just continue to add elements here. So if I was to have like a title, let's say, this is my title. I'm going to go, I'm going to go to right here, my title. Let's go to design. I'm going to set, remember, auto height for that. Let's go to 32. Once again, my line height should be a value divisible by 8. Typically, like I said, like if it's four, then you'll see the text line up in the middle. Four is a more flexible baseline value. If you look at Google Material Design system, everything like main spacers are values of eight, but when it comes to line height, it's a value of four. So here I'm going to choose like 32. Because it's a title, I can choose 32. And I'm going to go ahead and drop this right into my auto layout object, right? And you'll see here, like this might be a little bit off. So what I do is I select that text field, press Shift A. Now it has its own auto layout. And I can add a little bit of padding at the top to make sure that that baseline is in check. And you'll see that it's kind of throwing this off. So I can add a little bit of padding at the bottom to make sure that it's also in step. So now on the line, on the line, on the line, on the line. And basically this auto layout object on the text itself gives me the ability to add that like little bit of spacer padding on the top and on the bottom. So this is nested. This text is nested in an auto layout. And I want to make sure that this is set to fill. Because you always have to think about how is it relating to the larger object. So right here it says fixed width. I want this to fill container, and I want this to fill container, right? So if this is fill container, right, then as I build this out, right, it's just going to continue to go, right? And then for the entire container, I can set it to fixed, right? And then I could set that to left and right. And then that then makes this responsive. And if you see anything not being responsive, you can just go in there and make sure that that is also set to fill container. And you know, it just takes a little bit of cleanup. Like, okay, these are now fill container, and this is now fill container, and the 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 container is also set to fill container, right? So now they're all following its parent. So if you think about the way the CSS is constructed, you know, you have these parent containers, you just have to instruct it. So now this text is in there. And what's really cool is as I adjust this, let me change this line height. If I move this up by another value of 8, you see all the baselines are lined up at 32. So if I go up by 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, you'll see that, oh, it might be a little bit off. And the reason that it's also off is every font has its own baseline definition, which may require a small adjustment to the padding that I'm working with, right? So I click on the object that's padded here, and I can either, oops, make sure I grab the right one. Where's my title? There's my title. And I could adjust the padding. Do. And once I make that adjustment to the padding on the top and on the bottom, right now you'll see everything else follows suit. And everything is nice, got that vertical rhythm, and is just the way that I want it to be. And what's cool is that this whole object kind of moves together. So I can like re-snap this to the baseline and they're all lined up. And then same thing here, I can expand this image to be a little bit bigger, expand this image to be a little bit bigger. And the one thing you want to remember is that images in Figma are just fills. So if I'll take a photo of Generous, boom, there's a photo, and boom, there's a photo. So like as I scale this, there we go. And you'll see that it'll all be like in line. So if you really want to get like that deep into making sure the baseline is respected in the layout, and you can find out more. Oops, let me make sure I have some like line breaks in here. There you go. Make that bold. There you go. Now I can turn off the grid, Control G. And like I like to multi-layer these grids, and you could always turn it off here too, right? So I can like hide and view that. And if I create like, let's say another phone layout, right? So I got like another phone layout and I want to keep the same grid. There's two ways you can do it. I could just copy paste this over, or I can create a grid style. So here, new grid style, I could say, you know, phone for call. And when I go here, I can open up that grid style. And there it is. And what's cool about this is I can adjust this. I can come in here and be like, okay, let's chill out with the rows for a bit because they're a little bit too distracting. And when I hide it, it hides it globally, right? So that makes it your life a little bit easier when you're like going through and you're like, oh, okay, I want my rows again, and like you could turn them on, turn them off, right here within that style, and that becomes global. And I think I'm gonna have to cut it off there. I could literally just go on all day about just random stuff in Figma. Hopefully, this was enough to give y'all some insights and to play around and be a little more curious. Can you get your lecture for Smart Animate Easing? Yeah, here, let me give it to you. My lecture for Smart Animate Easing. If you go to figma.com/Miggi, I actually made like another one and I can't find it. I made a really cool one that has these examples. But here we go. Here's my lecture. When in doubt, use ease in out. Um, I'm gonna give you all the link to it and I'll walk you through really quick so you know what to do. Let me go to here and I'm gonna go to my community files. These are my community jams? No, those are my community jams. Where is it? They're around here somewhere. Activities for the virtual classroom. Bam. Did I not save it here? I probably didn't save it here. Man, where did I put it? When in doubt. Ah, there we go. Thank you, Alfie. So basically the way that this works, um, if you press like function right, you can go slide by slide, or function left. You know, it also works if you hit like N, 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 and Shift N, Shift N, Shift N, right? Go slide to slide. But when you hit play on the prototype, right, all of these are their own separate prototypes. So this basically explains like how and why you would use each type of ease in, right? So speeding up, imagine a car accelerating to a top speed. So use it from animating objects from on screen to off screen. This is used to animate objects from off screen to on screen, right? Linear, a lot of people think like linear is garbage, but it has a purpose. It's constant speed. So if you're ever animating something from off screen to off screen at a constant speed, so imagine a car going 60 miles an hour, it enters your field of view and then leaves at your field of view, it can be at a constant, so it makes sense. You don't see it slowing up or starting down. But once again, my favorite is going to be the ease in out, where you accelerate, reach a top speed, and slow down. So this is most helpful whenever you're animating an object that's in the screen, that's going to a point and then ending. And then the ease back is also helpful. So here I'll just demonstrate really quickly how to use this. When you hit play, all of the different ease types will be over here on the left. So I can like go to the different types of eases and you just tap it. So ease in, right? It's going off screen. Ease out, it's coming from off screen, coming on screen. Linear, right? Something that's at constant speed, linear, that makes sense. Even if something's like constantly rotating, it'd be best at a linear speed. Ease in out is there's an object that's on screen, it's going on screen, right? Going back and forth. So this, it gains speed and then it slows down at the very end. So all movement, or like the most natural movement that you see where an object is at rest and then it gains motion, then becomes at rest again, is some type of ease in out. It's just a matter of how you adjust the amount of force that's causing it to move and the amount of force causing it to slow down. So like the majority of your eases are going to follow that S function, but it's just a matter of how exaggerated that S is going to be. So here we go, from point A to point B, and then easing out back. I like it for just like a little bit of exaggeration, right? And what's happening here is like you're gathering momentum, you're kind of like moving back. If you ever watch an old school cartoon, when someone's gonna like, you know, like punch someone in a cartoon, they're like revving up before they go forward. That's what like the easing out back kind of performs. So it's a tiny little bit of elasticity that allows that to take place. Lastly, I would also recommend that you check out on my files. I have another one that talks about Smart Animate right here, make loading animations. I'll share the link with this. Make loading animations. I have a couple of fun examples. Oh, wait, let me go back one. With this, I also have a bounce. So like inside of the slide deck, there's also a bounce example and a Pac-Man in and out example. So if you hit play, you go on each of those frames and I walk you through some of these like different animations. So like here's my Pac-Man, right? And it's just like rotating and moving objects. kind of relying on secondary motion. If you hit Command Y, you can actually see how it's being produced. I have this little fun asterisk example. And it's like this type of play and experimentation that helps inform more complicated prototypes. But it keeps you, it just keeps you thinking and finding the edges of Figma. And like I said, let me just show you loading. Make Animations lab. So this is a lab that I did with my students back way when. So it's a little bit of an older file, but demonstrates a couple things here. Here I have like a loading circle animating, and this is using a very complex way of like masking and also like inferring how you can control an object going one way or another when rotating it. And let me just hit play and I'll just show you. So like one of these, this first one shows kind of like a loading animation where no object is actually in the center. Do you have a recording for the Smart Animate lecture? I really want to dig into the details. I have a 5-minute walkthrough. If you there's a live stream last year, Figma Like the Pros. I'll actually end off on that. I'll show you where those live streams are because I feel like those live streams from last year and this year are really, really helpful and they can give you a lot to level up when you're working on Figma. But here, lastly, I'll just show you this real quick. This is kind of demonstrating how you can kind of like lie with keyframes. So when I'm animating this, at no point are all of these dots actually all lined up at the same point, right? So it's kind of like tricking the eye in making you think that they're actually lined up. So it's hiding the initial keyframe to give it just a little bit more kind of reaction and look like it's overlapping the 3 different objects. Then oh no, is there only one flow on here? Did I not set that up right? Oh, that's a bummer. Okay, let me move this here. And then this one is showing that like rotation. This was kind of like a little bit of a challenge to demonstrate how you can get this like full movement. Because you can't animate the arc tool, this is not easy. So literally what I'm doing is the same thing where I have like a ball rotating, and then I also have a mask revealing half of a circle and then half of a circle to make you feel like you're animating a whole circle. And in this instance, the first part's an ease in and the second part's an ease out, as opposed to a full ease in out. So sometimes you actually have to break up an animation to get it to perform the way that you want to. So this one here too, very complex. I'm actually animating a number of different things to give the appearance of like overlapping animation, wherein like, you click on this and you have these like lines kind of backing up and you have the color kind of changing, and it's using color overlay and a bunch of other things. So it's really just kind of like pushing, like what's there. I think, and then this would be like some of the examples that like my students would like kind of work on, and we'd like play around in the file doing different things with this. So cool. All right. So like I said, last thing I'm going to focus on, youtube.com/Figma Design. There's a live stream called Figma Like the Pros. So that presentation that I gave it in less than 5 minutes. Figma Pros. So this one was from 3 weeks ago. I highly recommend it. And then I'll show you one more. I believe this is the one from last year, 30 time saving tricks from Figma experts. Nope, that's not it. I'll have to look for it. It might have, oh, here we go. Tips and tricks from the teams that build Figma. Yep, there we go. So this is that whole presentation right there. So if you want to like dig into it, I had to do it kind of fast. There you go. All right, cool.
Thanks, Miggy. Really appreciate it. I know a lot of people here enjoyed it. You had a good 42 people pop in and out, so that's great.
That's awesome. Yeah, thanks for having me. Take care, everyone. Have a good night.
Yeah, thanks for staying a little late.
Yeah,
Appreciate
no
you.
problem. It's fun.
Have a good
Yeah,
night.
feel free to follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Professor Figma on TikTok.
Nice, nice.
Trying to build a following there. I'm not so great at Figma at TikTok just yet. Old man. All right, y'all. Take care.
Cool. Yep. See ya. Bye bye.
Thanks again. Peace.